everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this PowerShell Bootcamp. I'm Mark, and I'm going to be your trainer today. All right. I'm Marc-André. I'm the Ed Automation nerd here at Enable. My role consists to help partners of all shapes and sizes and try to do my best to make you guys as efficient as you can be. That is to help you guys create scripts, automation policy, build automation manager with a dev team where I can create some of the content. Whatever I can do. I wrote this course and I write courses like that all the time. This is a big part of what I do and I thoroughly enjoy doing it, as you'll likely see pretty soon. If you did not figure it out yet, I'm French Canadian. I can speak a little fast, and with the accent makes it a bit tough. If I go too fast, just put in the questions, say, hey Mark, you're going too fast, and I'll slow down a bit, no big deal. I won't take offense, I'm kind of used to it. On the right side, you see my LinkedIn and Twitter right below my little mugshot there. So if you want to follow me on social, those are the easiest. You'll be able to find me there, and that is where I post when we have new content, courses, and things like that. This is our agenda for today. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about different PowerShell versions, the environment, things like that, just so that we're all on the same footing to use a platform. Then the rest of the course will be lab driven, where we're going to see different commands, comparisons, if statements, arrays, loops, using multiple commands together to do different things, the output of one into the input of the other one, for example, then using script inputs, modules, and so on. So this is going to take us, this morning we ran like literally right on the dot. Depends how really chatty I get and how sidetracked I get, but hopefully we get on track today and we go right about the 2.5 hour mark, which is what we scheduled for. As we start this, why would we want to use PowerShell, right? Honestly, it's because simply PowerShell has become the de facto standard. We have a lot of different tools that exist for scripting out there, but PowerShell really became the standard now, and now that it works on macOS, Linux, and really anything now, that makes it really the best platform for scripting on anything. It is super flexible, it's easy to use, there's a ton of available scripts pre-made online. One of the biggest things that we talk to people about when they start using automation is don't reinvent the wheel, use the wheel. And with PowerShell, it's amazing because there's so many people that have created different things that you can leverage, modify, and reuse as much as you can. It also works with the vast majority of RMM platforms. Now, depending what you guys use, whether you use our platforms or others, they'll likely support PowerShell in one way or another. So this is why a course like this is very useful. So depending on what you guys use, you will get a lot of use out of this. And there's also finally a ton of third-party modules. We'll cover the modules towards the end a little bit, just to kind of give you guys an overview. But there's a lot of modules for Azure, AWS, Google, things like that. VMware, yeah, there's a ton. They're built by third-party companies, they're built by third-party people, company, whatever. There's a ton of them. You can use them without having to recreate all the function. You just use them, which makes it super nice. On the versions of PowerShell, nope, she does not want. There's a lot of different versions over the years. So if we look, use a little pen. If we look from the beginning, PowerShell 2 is where PowerShell really took off. PowerShell before that was more or less just ignored and non-existent. But PowerShell 2 is when it really got on the map, is when you started to be able to do a lot of cool stuff. And that was back 13 years ago now, wow. After that, we saw PowerShell 3 and 4 more or less got ignored. Nobody cared about them. And then 5.0 came built into Windows 10. That is when we saw a big shift. And we saw the complexity that we see today. A lot of people are like, oh, I still have PowerShell 2. It's like, oh, well, this is on PowerShell 5. I'm having an issue. This doesn't work, and so on and so on. And that is simply because Windows 10 is the only one that comes with PowerShell. Well, now it's 5.1, but comes with PowerShell 5 or 5.1 built in. Otherwise, the older versions, you have to install it with their little tricky installer, which is convoluted for a lot of people. So people just haven't done it very well. And it's become very difficult as we see more and more things require PowerShell 5 and 5.1. I see the odd script that needs PowerShell 3, but that's pretty rare. Typically, it's PowerShell 5 and 5.1. So those are the most common versions you'll see out there. Microsoft finally came out with PowerShell Core. It's 6.0, 6.x. And that is when they took a big shift in that they started supporting Linux and macOS. That's a huge change in their in their path is that they now support those OSs as well instead of just Windows. And what they did with that is that they made a version that is similar in syntax and usability, but they have some very important differences, which is why a lot of people don't use it on those platforms yet, because a lot of the scripts they have don't work very simply. And PowerShell 7 came out 2 years ago now, almost 2 years. And we are not seeing a big adoption for a few reasons. One of them is that it sits side by side with 5.1. It doesn't update. You can install PowerShell 7 and still use 5 if you wanted to, which is just odd, but that's the way they've done it. And also, it's an optional only install. Microsoft finally announced that they should this year be forcing PowerShell 7 to be pushed through Windows Update because the adoption is so low, they just have to force it. But at the moment, we simply don't see it. So I have it installed, I test with it, but I build everything I build on 5.1 because, simply said, we don't see 7 out there very much. So just something to keep in mind if you're going to be using PowerShell a lot. You can install the latest one, but I would definitely build everything you do on PowerShell 5. PowerShell is backwards compatible in the sense that a script built on 5 will work on 7. A script built on 7 that is compatible with the functions of PowerShell 5 will work on 5. As long as you don't use a function that is only in the latest build, it will work in previous ones. This is a similar approach to what they've taken with Office documents. When you save an Office doc, it would save with the oldest possible version of that doc. And if you start using newer versions, it would limit it. They did a very similar thing with PowerShell. So just be mindful when you run scripts. If you get an error like command let not found, things like that, that's usually a version issue. Now that we know all these different versions are out there, and like I said, typically you'll see this more than anything else, probably this one more than anything else now. Let's take a look at how we're going to be able to build code. For those of you that have never used PowerShell or never use it very much, you probably are aware that there's something called PowerShell ISE, or integrated something environment. I can't remember, but it's the IDE that they've built for PowerShell that's been there since way back in the day. PowerShell 2. I've been using it for many years, and it's widely used. There's a lot of help online, and it's awesome. The problem though, it's been kind of deprecated. Microsoft is no longer adding anything to it. The end of life it. What they've done is they've kind of let it go in favor of Visual Studio Code. This is their replacement for it. And Visual Studio Code allows you to program in a lot of languages, from Python to mostly anything, and build your own code. And there is a plugin for PowerShell as well. It is fully supported. It is now the new tool for PowerShell development. It has IntelliSense just like ISC does, but you know, this is something that it feels still infantile. It's weird to me that they would have discontinued ISC without having a parity of features or usability between the two, but it's really close. So I forced myself in the last year to use this, and the transition's been pretty smooth, but we'll cover that in a few minutes. There's a couple other options from third parties. One of them is called PowerShell Studio. It's a third-party tool. It is not something that I would advise, simply from the point of view that it costs like $400 US per user. It is very expensive. This is not a cheap tool. So if you want to use it, we're welcome to do it, but it is a very expensive tool to install. It has amazing features. It allows you to compile MSIs, to compile a variety of different languages, do all kinds of cool stuff. It's amazing, but it is expensive, whereas VS Code is free. And it is a de facto standard from Microsoft. So I tend to prefer that personally. And you also have Notepad++. Sometimes the more purists will prefer to use something like Notepad with a PowerShell add-on to be able to do their code editing in like a pure text editor. The old school scripters are used to that. So personally, I use it from time to time just for the fun of it, but it lacks a lot of the polish that you see in VS Code, where it will give you yeah. So anyways, Notepad++, it's missing a lot of the polish that you would see, but some people do prefer it. I do like it personally. And yeah, ISC is integrated scripting environment. Thank you, Jason. Completely forgot what the name was. So let's do a quick review. So for those of you that have not used VS Code, or for those of you that are used to PowerShell but may still be using PowerShell ISC, I'm going to show you using VS Code, because that is what we're going to want to focus on for today. So super simply, to install VS Code, what you need to do is you go to your browser, and then we're going to go to code.visualstudio.com. So you go to code.visualstudio.com, you click on download, you get the installer. As you can tell here, it shows a screenshot. You can do Python, you can do C++, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. It's really nice. But you download the latest one, takes about 100 megs, it goes super fast. Once you've downloaded it, you run the installer, you do next, 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 and it's done. The first thing, no questions, that I recommend is once you've installed it, you want to find the shortcut that you have. I right click on it, I go to properties. Come on, buddy. Go to properties. You go to open file location. This is going to take you right to the installer, the code.exe file. And the reason I recommend to go there is that I recommend right clicking, doing properties, and under compatibility, choosing run as admin. The reason I say that is that a lot of the scripts you're going to create are going to interact with registries, with services, with files, with things that are restricted. And if you don't run as admin, you're going to get a lot of user access errors and weird stuff. And I find it very difficult when I build scripts if I don't have this. To be honest, PowerShell ISC, I always got used to running it as admin. And what I would do is, very similarly, I would right click on ISC and say run as admin, right? Just like that. So what I've done is in here, I just set it as a default. So anytime I open VS Code like that, it will do a little pop-up. It's like, hey, you want to run as admin? And I say, yes, please. Just like that, and say, yes, please. And then this launches for me, and I'm in as an administrator, which gives me the higher privileges. I find that this works. Yeah, sure. I find that this gives me a better quality. It will work better for me, and I like it that way better. It's more of a preference. You don't have to, but that is definitely something that I would recommend. Once you've installed and you've set that, you open up Visual Studio, you get in. We're just going to clean that up from this morning. There we go. And you get in. So the first thing you'll see is that this is going to look more or less something like this, right? Now, it won't be very much. What you want to do is you go to File, you go to Preferences, and you go to Extensions. PowerShell will not be installed by default. You come here and you search. And when you see it, you'll see there's a ton of different PowerShell things. There's universal coding from third parties and all kinds of cool stuff. The one we're looking for is PowerShell. Now, mine is already installed. If it's not, it would say install here. You click on this and woo, it installs. Super easy. Once it's installed, it's going to ask you at the bottom, do you want to confirm something, blah, blah, blah. You say yes. It takes a few, maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes. Once it's all nice and done, it's basically ready to use. At that point, PowerShell is in, you're good, and that's it. And the next thing I'm going to recommend is to set up the visual UI. And that is more of a preference thing, but I don't care. I'm going to recommend it. Because a lot of people, when they start adding changes like that, and maybe that's just me getting old, but as you start seeing changes to the UI, it's a little harder to adjust unless it looks a lot similar. So what I typically do is I go to Workbench Appearance. Again, guys, don't panic. It's all in your lab manual. You don't need to try to do it at the same time. You likely won't be able to because it's way too fast. But you're going to have all of this in your lab manual. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to your appearance. Personally, in the color theme, I pick PowerShell ISE. I either pick this one or Dark Plus. Dark Plus is just like dark mode that everybody's familiar with. But ISC I like is the white and blue that you're familiar with if you've used PowerShell in the old school ISC. It gives you a more familiar feel to it, which I personally prefer. If you don't like that, that's fair. Just if you want to use Monokai or whatever one that you like, go for it, right? There's a ton of different ones. But personally, this gives me the feeling that I'm used to, and I like that. So it's more of a preference. You don't have to, but I like that. So once I've done that, I click that out. The last thing that I like to do is setting up my workspaces. So what you can do is if you go to File and you see Add a folder to a workspace, it basically adds a Windows Explorer into the designer by going here. So you go File, Add folder to workspace, you pick the folder that you want. So maybe I'll take this Bootcamp Office Hours folder, who cares? This now adds it here, and I can browse to whatever I want under here or under these scripts or whatever folder I choose to add, which is nice. If you want to remove it, I'll just remove it, boom. But personally, I use a script one, then I go to my amps, and then I scroll down, and then I go to my PowerShell folder, yay. And then I'm going to right click and I'll say new folder and I'll say 2109:16 p.m. like that. Now this is my folder. Now again, this is basically like getting your own basically Windows Explorer built in, but I like it. So now when you're at that point, you have your ISC set up, you're good to go, and that's really for me the starting point. Let's make sure everybody's on the same page, everybody has that, and as you guys are ready, we'll move on. So grab the lab manual from the handouts and go to webinar if you have not done so. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a quick review of the UI, just go through some of the basic things that I kind of recommend everybody has some good understanding of. And I know it's basic for some of you, and I apologize. Again, this is an intro course, and since quite a few of you have never really used it, I want to make sure that I cover the basics. So when you show up, you'll have your workspace here, right? And then you'll have your terminal at the bottom, right? Easy enough. Oops, like this, whatever. First thing is, as you start doing stuff and whatever, and you have whatever, plenty of stuff, when the screen is filled up and you have a long scrolling, you can shift right click in the middle here, and you have a clear button. The clear button will just clear you back. Now, it's not a full clear, see? It keeps some stuff, it's just the way it works. So yeah, so you have to do that. So just keep that in mind. You shift right click, you can clear, awesome. And the next thing is you can open files from here, right? Duh, open file, open folder, easy. Or you can go with your workspace like I showed earlier. You pick whatever file you want. When you click on it, it opens it up. Now this is just kind of a preview. If you want to open it fully, you double click. What the difference is if I single click, see, and I move, it just goes back and forth between different files, right? So that is the difference. So if you want to have it fully open, you double click, double click, double click, and you can see it adds a bunch of tabs, right? So just like you would see in different tools, you right click in one, you can say close others, close this, close that, and just say close all. And that is just going to keep your area nice and tidy. That's really all it does. So if I look into this policy, I have a bunch of stuff, woohoo, whatever. To run it, you go right here, super easy. And when you run, it will run the script, right? Easy enough. If you have a script that's much longer, so something like this, script is a few pages long, it shows right here the whole script. You see in gray the zone that you're in, so super nice. I like that personally. Also, as you highlight stuff, you'll see here, this becomes blue. So it's super nice from a visual standpoint to see where you are. This is particularly useful when you have really long, really complicated scripts and you're looking for stuff. This will make your life a whole lot easier. And that is somewhat of a preference, like I said, but it's also very useful to take the time to set up and use the environment the way it's designed. Like someone took a lot of time to design it to work this way, to do all these different things, and I personally like that. Now, the color scheme by default will be pretty simple. Blue is all your commands. Orange is going to be your variables. Green is comments. When it's kind of, I guess, brownish, that is variables, like sorry, not variables, but it's things in like double quotes like text, and that's going to be there. And those are the primary thing you're going to see. Everything else in black are going to be like close and open statements, things like that. That's kind of the way that PowerShell works and visually does things. So get used to that because that's pretty important as you're going to be using it. There isn't too much else to know. On the left side, you do have your Explorer pane. You can show and hide. The search I don't personally use very much. I just tend to find what I'm looking for, or I do Control F to look. This is for your source control. You can actually link it to a Git repository or GitHub, things like that, and allows you to sync files and changes there. So that's super nice if that's what you want to do. Debug I don't typically use very much, not for PowerShell anyways. Extensions shows you what extensions you can install, so sure, why not? And then that one is a list of all the commands. It's kind of similar to this, really, but I personally don't use it very much. And that is, generally speaking, the only thing you have to worry about as far as the UI is concerned. You can use different things, but personally, that's kind of what I limit myself to because that's really all I need. Let's talk about our example. So today, when I do courses like this, I try to pick a specific example and run through the whole thing. So for example, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to do an example that I've had to do for a partner in the past. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to look for a specific service. And I'm sorry, I can't write really well on this with my mouse, but whatever, we'll go with it. So I had a service. We wanted to know, is it running? So yes or no. How long has it been, right? And then based on that, restart or let it be, right? And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to say get a list of services. Is the service that we want present? Is it started? When was it started? How long ago was it? So then we're going to do some math to do that. And finally, if needed, we'll restart it. All of this is literally a real example I've had to do for someone. So I figured it'd be a good one to go through with you guys and hopefully will help. My recommendation throughout the course is you can either do one file for each lab, which is a good way to do it, or you can use this exact same file throughout the whole course and simply use comments. So in comments in PowerShell are done in two flavors, either hashtag and that comments out the whole line or whatever's after. And you have smaller than and hashtag, and then hashtag and greater than. Whatever is between these two things will be commented out. So what I mean by that is if I go back to here and I pick some file, doesn't matter, this guy, and I say, okay, this here, hashtag, all of this to the right is commented out now, right? Easy. Or if I come here, the whole line is commented out. Or I can say smaller than and hashtag, and you can see here it already gives me the rest. And that now this whole section is commented out. So you can do that, and you'll see me do that throughout the course. That is what I'm going to do. There you go. And that gives you the ability to comment out what you want, and you could just comment out each lab as you go through and just keep the blocks you want. Once again, completely optional, but it's important to know how to use the comments, so that's why I'm covering it. All right, now let's talk about our first demo and what I'm going to do. So we're going to go to here, and what I want to start with is doing some very basic command to get a list of services and stuff. So if you start here, I do new, Control N, or file new, whatever you prefer. First thing you want to do is if you start using it, you'll notice it doesn't know what language you're doing it in, so it's just doing like Notepad, and it doesn't do anything. So I do save, Control S, or file save, whatever you prefer. And I'm going to save it and say lab2.ps1. Again, you could pick from the drop down, but I'm lazy, so I'm going to just type the extension, and boom. Now that I did that, you can see it shows the PowerShell logo. It understands the PowerShell script. So if I go get-service, you can see it recognizes the command. It gives me syntax, information, things I can do. The IntelliSense, as they call them, kicked in and is now working. So now I know this is a PowerShell script. The plus button is there, so I say get-service, and this will get me all the services. This gets me 3 data points. It's the status, the name, and the display. And what we're going to do next is from here is get service. And when I do get service, the next thing I want to do is I can say either do a pipe and say either FT for format table or FL for format list. Now, this is the short version. Format dash table, format dash list. Okay, so like that. Now the difference between the two is that the format table is gonna format it like it did here. That's a table. The format list, so we'll comment this out and see the list. The list one is basically doing a list of rows for each record. So this is a service, this is a service, and so on and so on and so on. So this is basically giving you one big block per service. So format list versus format table is very useful depending on what you're trying to get. Now the format list will give you more data, as you see. It gives you about 10 data points versus the 3. This is just the way it works. And to be honest, this is not even the full list. When you go into these functions, you'll see that there might be 10, 12, 15 different outputs. The format list will give you the most common ones, but not always the whole thing. So that is super important to know. Now, the next thing is, what does the pipe actually do? The pipe actually says, it says get a list of services, and then the pipe says whatever the output of this is, do something. And before it was format list, or I could do a where object, or I could do whatever I want, right? Different things. Some people will say get service dash names pooler, and then we'll do here restart dash service like that. Actually, we'll do 132. Yeah, it's better. So basically, what it does, where we go, it basically says get the service and then feed that information to him and say restart it. In this case, it makes no sense to do it this way. You could do it much simpler, but I'm just showing you the example. This is allowing me to say, okay, take whatever here, do something with it, and that is all that does. So now that I did that, let's say get dash service dash name spooler, right? And when I do that, it says it's right here because I found the one I'm looking for. If I put an X or I do something for a service that does not exist, it gives an error. And that is where something very important is happening. There's always different ways to run commands and do things where it's going to give you an error if it doesn't do what you want. So if your goal is to know, is that service on this machine? You may have some BizTalk application, some weird complex things, some finance system, some JD Edwards, Dynamics, whatever, and those services are there. Well, you don't want to run a specific policy or automation or script or whatever on a machine where that service is not even there. So you got to say get the name and then do something. Well, the error like this, depending on what RMMs you use, depending how you use them, depending on how you run them, you may get errors, and the errors will trigger in the RMMs or the platforms you use or Intune or whatever to show you that there was something wrong, even though it's perfectly fine. It didn't find the service and it was intended. So instead of doing it like this, where you say find spooler 3, which is not going to be found, what I can do is say get service, which will get all the services. Then I can say where object, and then I put that into curly brace. I'll say $_.name. That is basically saying take the values from this. So $_ is the value from this. .name is the name of the service. If we look here, remember there was a name, so I'm taking this name, dash the name dash eq. Eq means equal. It's a PowerShell quirk. We'll go to it. We'll come to it later. Don't worry about it. Spooler. So now I'm saying get a service where the name is spooler. So now what it did is it should find our service. There it is, named spooler. So if I do spooler X now, or spooler with a typo, you see it does not output anything, but more importantly, it does not error out because get service, gets the services, it's happy. Then the where object simply says, I found nothing. So we're done. And that is a very, very important distinction. This is going to give you, the both give you the same outcome, but one of them errors out, the other one does not. And that is something that you really, really want to seek when you build scripts. Now, let's say your goal is to know the service is there or not. So all you have to do is say service output equals to this, and then use the service output dot count. Most variables will have a count, and the count basically says 0 because I did not find it, or 1, I did find it. Or if I remove the where object and just say everything, it's 340 services, right? Because it's a count. It found 340 services in that list. So depending on how you use syntax and you build this, you have this. Now this can take me to build an if statement to say if the count is equal to 1, then blah, 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 blah. We're not going to go there yet. We're going to leave it alone, but it's important to know this is the first step towards that. Now, one more thing I could do is I can say dash and then I'll say $.status equals to running. Yes, it's still running, right? So this is giving me running. So if I do run that, boom, 1. And that is still finding it. Or say if I say here stopped, now it doesn't find it anymore. It says 0 because there's no service called spooler that stopped, right? So now I'm able to do a little more complex and get through this. This is our first example. This is our really first script that we're going to build. We're going to do this like that. We're going to go through like little block by block to build this. You'll see towards the end of the lab manual, there's a final script all built that I copy pasted. Don't go to it. Try to follow the manual and build it. I recommend it because it makes it easier and better for you. But you're welcome to adjust as needed. So, all right. So what we're going to do is come back and move on to the next thing. Before I do, a couple of people said they had an issue where it said could not run until the PowerShell session has started, blah, blah, blah. That happens from time to time because when you open up the VS Code, it has to initialize the PowerShell session. It should say here starting PowerShell or something like that at the bottom right. If that does that and it doesn't stop, honestly, I just save your file, close and reopen Visual Studio Code, and typically that fixes itself within a few seconds. It's something that I see from time to time. It's not super common, but it is a bit of an annoyance. So now the next thing we're going to touch on is talking about variables. Variables in PowerShell are numerous, and they can be a little weird because there's some silly kind of overlap and different assumptions that get made. What I mean by that is that when you look at the common data types for it, the first common one is obviously string, duh, like any text, right? Blah, blah, blah. And then you have a bunch of different ones. A lot of them you're never going to use, you're never going to have to worry about. So what I typically do is I reduce it down to this list. This is the ones that I typically see people use very commonly. So first one is string, like I said, it's text, right? Here's a sample value. Integer is the next most common one, 1, 0, -1, -1 million, things like that. The top value and negative value are those. Again, it's a 32 bit, so there's a max, and it's not crazy high. You could, if we look at the previous one, use long, but I don't see that used very often. Most people that use that will typically just use double because it's easier and it's more common. And then the double is basically a decimal value from negative this crazy number to positive this crazy number. I had to use exponents because I couldn't put as many zeros as I wanted. So that's what typically people will use. Boolean is the quintessential 1, 0, true, false, yes, no, right? People are used to that. The only difference is that in PowerShell, it stores the value of true or false like this, $true or $false. This is the way it does. You could use 1 or 0. It does kind of recognize it, but I would still use true and false like that because that is the way it's intended to be used. The next thing is datetime. Datetime is amazing. It is a variable that actually will create its own, it's kind of like its own class where it will have a series of outputs. It will keep the date that you asked it to, like get date right now, easy. But it's going to also output like the day of the week, the day of the month, all kinds of cool stuff. So if we take a quick little look at that, what I mean by that is if I go here and I say clear that out for now, and I'm going to say get date, and I say date now equals this, then I'll say date now hashtag tag format list. When I do that, you can see it outputs all of this. It gives you the date, the day of the month, the day of the week, the day of the year, and all kinds of cool stuff. That is what a date does. It does a ton of output. This is just because the way the class works, it will output that and have it available. So I can say, give me date now, the day of year. We are on day 259, and that means there's 106 days left in the year. Woohoo, getting there. But that does that, and that tells you that. XML object basically allows you to import or create an actual XML file and actually browse through it. If you know the syntax, you can actually do some really cool stuff. I use it all the time. It's amazing. And finally is arrays. We're going to touch on arrays later. Arrays are going to be lists of stuff, right? So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values into one variable. That's an array, right? That's what it does. So those are the common ones. So if we look at demoing variables and playing with them a tiny bit, what I typically like to do, hold on, there you go. So what I'm going to do is come here and clear that out because who cares? So the first thing I do, let's say I do variable a equals to 1. Now if I do variable a dot get type 2 like that, format table, that's better. It's telling me it's an integer, right? The system is able to recognize that this variable is an integer, and it's telling me that. If I put double quotes now and I rerun this, it now says it's a string because it has double quotes. It knows it's supposed to be a string, right? The system is kind of smart enough to know kind of what you're trying to do here. So if I do 1.1 and I do the same thing, right? So like this variable b.getType. Now I say this is a double. The system automatically knows what you're trying to do. If you're used to other programming language where you see C#, a lot of different ones, even Python, you have to declare a lot of your variables. You have to set up what they are, the types and stuff like that. PowerShell just assumes that for you. Now you could force it. I can see 1.1 is an int, right? It's an integer, I don't care. And then I'll say output it back, and it's gonna basically truncate it because I said it says it's an integer and that's actually a string. It's actually a double, so it says no, I can't do that, and it forces it in. Similarly, if I have this 1, I can say this is an integer. What it's going to do is going to convert it to an integer for me, right? You can typecast. What it's called typecasting is that it's going to convert or force something somewhere, no biggie. So I could go here and say variable C is equal to int variable A. And that is going to convert that into the other one. So again, type ft like that. And now this is a double. Wait, what did I do? Variable A, B, and C. Hold on, what did I do wrong? I made a typo somewhere. I'm still nowhere. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically it says here int, and then your double is that one. So the system is able to kind of convert that and play with it depending on what you're asking it to do. Now, you could also do string to number, number to string, as long as they're the right type. So for example, here, this is my 1. If I put an X in it and I try to convert that to an int, it's going to go like, no, what are you doing, buddy? And then it errors out because it goes like, you should not be doing that. So if you do a typecast, you need to make sure it's going to be valid. Good example is I've done that recently when I built the monitoring for the Windows 10 version, where it was 1904, 2000 something, whatever. And then for some reason, Microsoft changed it to like 20H1, 21H1, 20H2, and so on. This is actually a string, because I saw it was a string variable, but I'm like, that doesn't make sense. It should be a number. So I forced it into a number. And then when they decided to go with the 20H1 scheme, my service broke down and people had to go do some changes. And again, yeah, I was forcing it into a number because I saw it was a number. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And that. So if you're going to do those conversions, make sure that you keep that in mind when you build it, right? That's super important. And that's a bit of an overview on the variables. I will play with them a lot more for the rest of the course. But I do like to at least show you guys a little bit as we start with this. So that is that piece. We're not going to do a lab on that because I don't think it makes sense. But in your lab manual, you do have a demo of that. So if you want to play with it, you're welcome to look at it later. The next thing is if statements. If statements is easy. I'm saying that with all reserve. It's easy to use if you understand the basic logic of it. Basically, the way it works is if something between brackets, then whatever it is, or else something else. That is the basic logic of the if statement. Now, some people will make it all in one line, multiple lines, different ways. That becomes a little hard, in my opinion. I prefer to do it like I'm doing on the screen. I'll show you the difference. But that is basically that. Now, these are all the operators or the common ones that I was able to find online for PowerShell, for if statements and different things like that. And that is a massive amount of them. Now, you're not going to use the vast majority of them. This is a list that you're going to likely use on a day-to-day basis if you start doing scripting. So what I was saying earlier, you know, A equals B, right? If A equals B, then do something. That doesn't work. You have to do -EQ for equal. Or if you say, you know, not equal, equal with a little thing or the exclamation mark, you have to do NE for not equal. You can do, instead of the greater than, you have to do GT. Less than, is this. Greater than or equal, you do this. Less than or equal, you do LE. It's just they decided to rename the operators to all of this. Now, why they did that, I have no idea. But that is the way that they build their logic. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm used to it now, so it's not a huge deal, but I'm not a huge fan. It's just the way they work it. The next ones are even worse or more confusing. It's like and match. Like is basically, it will return true or false based if whatever is here matches whatever is here, right? Before and after. The like supports wildcards like this, right? Little stars. So on the match, it will basically match a regex. So you can actually do a regex expression, regular expression into this. So if you're familiar with regex, you're going to love this because you can do your own regex and see, does it match the pattern of A versus B, right? And then you can do that. So those are the majority of the operators that you're going to use in any given script. You might be using more. Once again, the list is super long, but on a day-to-day, you're likely going to use this. So that's why I reduce the list down. Hopefully, helps you guys make a little sense of it. So A couple of things to keep in mind, right? So if I do this like that, right, A equals B. Obviously, A is not equal to B, but if it was, it would go here and do whatever is in the bracket here. If not, in this case, it's not, so it would go here and do this, right? That makes sense. Now, one more thing you can do is you can do else if. So if you do else if, it's one word, no space, super important. You can say if not, else if this, not, then else. You could do multiple else if, by the way. You could do 2, 3, 4 of those. But in this case, I only did one because that's all I needed for my demo. But you could do that. Let's do a quick example from our earlier lab, and then we'll come back and do some more playing with. So if I go here and I get my service, because I'm lazy, we're going to copy paste because, you know, easy. So I get my list of services and do like that. And I'll change that to win32 times just for the time being. Sorry. I didn't realize it until I said it. So I'm going to say if my output.count. So if my output.count greater than 0. So if I found anything, then found ya, else did not find you. Right? Oops. Double quotes. I forgot. Okay. So this is allowing me to say, okay, if I find it, it's right there. If it's not, it's right there. Now, this is my preferred syntactic way of doing it. You can see here, found me because it was 1, right? Duh. And then if I make a typo here, nope, I didn't. If I was to say, you know what, I don't want this, it would still find it because it will, the count is greater than what I'm looking for, right? Now, this is, in my opinion, the proper syntactic way to do ifs. I see people that like to compress their code as much as they can. I find it incredibly hard to read, but I'm going to show you anyways. So those two things will be exactly the same as far as functionality is concerned. This one line is basically this whole block. Personally, I find this a lot harder to read. Like if this, then this, else this. I personally find it hard to read. I prefer this longer version, but do what you will. When you write code, you know, it's your prerogative to do it different ways. PowerShell does not care. See, if I run it, they both work just fine, right? If I do this here, they both still work just fine. Like they are syntactically speaking exactly the same. It's just more of a preference, I guess, and that is my preference. And yeah, Jason saying he likes my way better. Yeah, I do too, because this I find it's very hard to read. If you have like, you know, 30, 40, 50 line of different things like that with different length and different whatever, like these are simple, but some of them people I've seen, they'll have super long, like 5, 6 lines long of commands like that. It becomes incredibly hard to know what you're doing. So I personally prefer like that. Again, do what you will. So yeah, so the next thing now is going to be looking into arrays. So the arrays is another concept that can be a little foreign, but it's incredibly critical. Most of anything you do in PowerShell, or if you find scripts, use scripts, whatever, they're going to be using arrays. So you need to have at least a basic level of familiarity with it. It's super important. All right, introduction. Could not be any easier. I'll, you know what, actually, so that's crit. We'll go through it in the live demo right now. What we're going to do is move this down. There you go. So an array at a super level array list is equal to 1, 2, 3, whatever, and as many as I want. That is my array, right? That is ever so simply an array. If I do this.count, it will say I have 17 things in it. And to make sure it's not a fluke, I'm going to add 3 more. Now it's 20. That works. Now if I say array list format table, boom, this is my list. The system is able to output that back to me. So essentially, the array is a list of items that I can then loop on, that I can do stuff with. It's just a collection, right? So similarly, if I do SDC list equal to get dash service, SDC list F format table, that is an array. That's an array of services. This is a list, right? You're going to see this throughout everything you do in PowerShell. So if you're not familiar with that, take the time, get familiar, because that is going to be insanely critical. And the next thing now is going to be looping. So, all right. So looping is the next key concept. Now that we have arrays, we're going to say, okay, we have a list of something, loop through the list and do something, or do something 5 times, 10 times, whatever, right? I guess it's just the concept of looping over yourself multiple times. There's 5 primary types of loops you're going to see in PowerShell. You have your standard for each item in the wait, not yet. For each item in the list, do this, right? So if I have a list of 5 things, the loop will automatically run 5 times, right? Easy. The for loop we're not going to use very much. It's basically you create an index as you do it. I don't like it, man. While I also don't use that much. It's between while and do while, to be honest. They're fairly similar. I'll just say, here's something, and then while something is true, keep doing it, right? We'll see an example of that in a second. And do until is like do while, but it's the other way around. So do while A is greater than B. Do until A is lower than B, right? It's basically just the opposite of each other, but they're similar, so I don't use that very much. So this leaves us with these 3. Personally, I'll primarily use these 2, so we're going to leave that alone as well. More of a preference, but we'll focus on those for the rest of the course, the rest of the lab for that one. So the for each loop, super simple. You say, okay, get my list of service, just like I did earlier, right? List of service. For each record in the list, that's the way you should read it, right? And then it's going to say, okay, for each of those, then do something. The cool thing about it is that what it does is I'll say, okay, this list contains 5 items. Each time you start the loop, take the next item in the list, feed it to this. So basically, this initializes the variable for you with whatever the next record is. And it does that 5 times because there's 5 records, right? This, and this. Woohoo! And that does that for you. The do while on the other end, basically you have to create your indexes or whatever conditions. In my case, I usually use a row ID or a row count or a row whatever. And then I'll say do, and then do whatever. And then I'll increment my row ID. And then I'll say while something is true, right? That's important. Now, this is a typical simple do while loop. There's one thing that I'm going to point out, and I make this mistake myself all the time, way more than I'm willing to admit. Is just because I go a little fast and I forget stuff, and oh no, I made a mistake. What I mean is that I often forget to put my index incrementer. So if I don't put that, they'll just say do something while this is true. It's still true. Woo! Keep doing, and it'll never stop. This is what you call an infinite loop, and it will never stop. And then your code is never going to work properly. So first of all, that's why you test. Second of all, that is why you test a lot. And third, that's why you check what you do. Like honestly, like I can't stress this enough. I've done this many times, but you could have some very damaging code in there if it's run 50 or 100 or 1,000 or a million times, right? So you want to make sure you verify, you test, and you're comfortable with it. So on the loop side, so if we take this list of service like that, I can do it like this: for each, and then service record in service list. Like I said, the system will automatically take this and feed into this row by row by row, which is nice. Then I can say, okay, if service record dot name is equal to spooler. So if you find the service, hold on, it's easier with my typos. Gotcha. And then end. And that's it. That's the end of it. That is our loop. And it looks for something. If I run this now, oh, I did put that, hold on, like this. Now it says gotcha, because it ran through each of those 340 records and it finally found it, right? So it does that by looping through. And here's like, I can show you that it worked. I'll say loop. And then if I rerun this, now it goes loop, 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 loop. Yes, loop, 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 and it stops, right? And this is just to show you it actually does loop every single record until it finds the one that I want. So this is the way that this is intended to work. This is just looping over itself. Now, similarly to the if, you could make that into a big long line, but please don't do that. That's just mean. But you could. The next one is I can say, okay, so row ID equals to 0. We always start the row ID at 0 because every list like that, when it gets populated, it goes from index 0 to whatever. So if you have 200 record, it'll be 0 to 199. If you have 5, it'll be 0 to 4. If you have 10, it'll be 0 to 9. And I think you get the point. So because of that, we're going to start at 0. Then we're going to say do Oops. Okay. Do. Come on, buddy. Okay, I'm struggling right now. We'll get there. So do, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna say do if SVC list row ID dot name is equal to spooler, and then found ya, and if not, nope. So we're gonna comment out this section just so that we don't have any confusion on this, like that. And with that one works slightly differently, but you can tell it's very similar, right? And then while I'm gonna say row ID is less than SVC list.count, right? And done. Now I completely forgot to put my row ID plus plus, so row ID plus plus, or like that. Those two, 62 and 63 right here, are absolutely 100% identical. These lines are doing the exact same thing. Just pick whatever you prefer and go with it. PowerShell supports the old school short form of plus plus, meaning you plus one save yourself. And it supports the long way of doing that. Pick one. And then if I rerun this, I can see nope, 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 and find you. So I know this works. And it just loops over itself until it hits that. Now, if I don't put this, it will just loop over row 0 forever and ever and never finish. And that is never good, right? You don't want that. So now that we've done that, we have our while it actually goes through and does that. Couple of things that I've not introduced yet is this one here. Oh, hold on. No. If service list, and then again, square brace, basically I'm saying go into that list and get the record for this row. So again, I started 0, 1, 2, 3. So similar to the for each, which is populating the next one here, I'm just going to that record manually with the row ID. These two pieces of code, in this case, do the exact same thing, aside from one says gotcha, one says found you. Don't sue me, but other than that, they're absolutely identical in their function, their execution, and the time they'll take. It's just a matter of what you prefer. This one will generate a pointer to the variable and do it. This one just goes into the variable and looks. They do the exact same thing. They're not more efficient or less efficient, maybe by 0.1 millisecond, but in the grand scheme of things, you won't know, so big whoop. It's just a matter of what do you prefer. Personally, like I said, I prefer this. To me, this is simpler. For each, this, that, do whatever, done. I don't have to worry about incrementing rows. I don't have to worry about weird condition. I just do. That is a preference. But the while, what I could do is I could say, okay, do this, and basically, I can say while this and this is not equal to spooler. So whenever you find it, instead of going through all 340, I stop at 239 because I found what I was looking for. So this now becomes slightly more efficient because I don't have to loop through every single line. This is just to have an option, right? And what we're going to do now, let's go a little further. We're going to use WMI to get data that is not otherwise accessible in PowerShell. And the reason I'm going to go that route is that I need to get the process ID of the actual process first, the service, spooler, for example, so that I can then go back and get the start time of said process. So there's different ways to do it, but I chose to use this route because I wanted to use that as my example. So if you'll bear with me, what we'll do is we'll take a quick look at getting that start date of said service. It's fairly simple, but there's a lot of components to it. So first step is going to be to the, okay, service name is equal to spooler, right? That's good. The next thing is service info is equal to get dash sim instance. Get sim instance is actually going into WMI, which is a core Windows component that has a lot of the very core middle of the OS data points. So we're going to go do that. Dash class name. Is that what it is? Yeah, class name. Whatever. Class name Win32 service, like that. What? Oh, I know why. Okay, it was the there you go, dollar. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so Win32 service, then dash filter, and then it'll be double quote name equal to single quote $ SVC name, like that. Okay, so this is specific. The service info will be output of that get sim instance, and we're going to go into the Windows 32 service class, and the filter is basically when you go into WMI, you can do queries and you can add filters. So I'm doing a filter to say look for the name being this. Now, because the syntax requires single quotes for the value, I'm putting single quotes, and my variable, the system will generate that for me. So if I was to output that, I think I should be able to output it just like that. See here, it is doing name equals spooler between single quotes, and that is what I'm having it do. So if I do service info now dot process ID, I'm getting that the process ID for my spooler is 852. And that's important. That's what we're going to use to then go get the process ID. So the next thing we do is say, okay, if service info process ID greater than 0. If the service is not running, it's not going to be a valid number greater than 0. It's either going to be null or something weird. So we'll just do that. Then I'm going to say, okay, process info is equal to get dash process. That's a very basic PowerShell command that's going to get that process info. And then what we're going to do is say, okay, get that is equal to get dash process dash ID, and then service info dot service info dot process ID. Yeah, like that. So now I'm at the point where I have the information about my process and what I can do, or process, whatever. And I can then do that start time. So now this, if I run this, says the service was started today at 10:04. That is because I restarted this morning during the other bootcamp. That makes sense. Now, what I need, so I got through, if we look at our list from earlier, right? We got our list of services. We check out the service on the machine. We check if it started. When was it started? Now I need to do this. If I go there, now that I have all this, right, I'm going to say, okay, date now is equal to get date. So one of the core Windows things that I can actually get the date that the service was started, and then I get the date of right now. And then date difference, date diff is equal to date now minus process info dot start time. So if I subtract these two, this is going to give me a difference. That difference, I can then say take math round. That's a core function within PowerShell. Honestly, you have to Google it because I wouldn't have known either. And I say total hours, comma 3. To say take that and put a 3 decimal in this. So you can see here 4.654. Now the reason I do that is if I do this, you can see it's 4.6555410. It's just too much. So I like to do 3 or 2 decimals and makes it clean, right? 4.6 hours. That's good enough for me. So now that I have this date difference that's rounded up for me, the only thing I need to do is say, okay, if that is greater than 24 or 48 or 36 or whatever I want, then finally restart dash service name dash force. That doing the force is just telling the command if the service does not want to get restarted, force it. There's actually some services that will be in a stopping state for a while. If you do force, it will time out. It will say screw you, kill the process, restart you. And that is something that you can do if you need to. And then finally, it's done, right? So in this piece, we do everything. So the first thing that I did that is very important to me is I made a service name configurable. I use this here. So what I'm doing is I'm saying the service name is spooler. And if I run this now, spooler has been running for 4.5 hours. If I change that to Win32 time, this is not running right now. Okay, that makes sense. Or wait, hold on. The service is not on the machine. It's W32 time. It's been running for an hour because I restarted it earlier. Because I did it with you guys, right? If you remember. So this is giving me that. So if the service isn't there, it doesn't error out. Super important. If the service is there, is it running? Yes. How long has it been? It's not long enough. Do nothing. And all of this is handled into these. Into these what? About 15-ish lines of code. this basically checks, is a service there? Is it running? How long has it been? What do I do? All of this is handled through this little code snippet. It's daunting. When you've never done this, you go like, wait, what? And I get it. But once you start doing your own, it actually makes a whole lot of sense. This example is a good example because it touches everything. It touches on weird variable stuff. It does comparisons with dates, which is super critical to everything. It touches on if statements. You have your loops up there. It does everything in there. And that is something that I purposefully put all of it in there because I find it very important that people get familiar with that. So the next thing I want to touch on is going to be using script inputs. Now, it's not something you would typically do if you use our products like Enable or RMM because you typically don't need it very much. But it is something that in a lot of scenarios you may want to do inputs. So if I take this whole thing and save that and I make a new one, then I'll save that to, I don't know, input stuff.ps1, doesn't matter. Now, the first thing you can do is at the beginning of your script, add a param line, and then I can say, no, in one, in two, and then just in one, and come on, in two, and then in one plus in two. So basically what I'm doing is I'm telling the system, expect two parameters. So when PowerShell runs the script, the first thing I'll check is the first thing that it does. They're like, oh, you're asking for parameters. And yes, you could still put comments and go like, you know, script created by Mark, blah, 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 and put that like 5 or 10 times because, you know, whatever. You can totally do that still. Now that you've done that, if I was to run this, so, okay, cd PM here. Okay, so input stuff like that. There's nothing because I'm not giving it the parameters, so it doesn't care. If I was to run this and go 1 and 2, it goes 1, 2, 3 because it goes 1, 2, then 1 plus 2, 3. If I do it again and go 5 and 5, it goes 5, 5, 10, right? Makes sense. It reads the first usable line of the script, which after all the comments is my parameter stuff. So a few things to note. When I do it this way, I could come here and say, I want this to be in int. And the other one, I don't care. So if I go here and I say x and 5, it goes like, no, you can't do that. I cannot convert x to a type int. It doesn't work because I said int here, right? It doesn't let me do that. It refuses. It goes like, no, you're not being right. So if I rerun this, now it works, right? Because I removed the typecasting. So you could force the type that you want as an input. It's really useful if you have a script that's very complex and your users go like, well, your script doesn't work because you did not enforce the variable types, and they just like, oh, instead of putting 1, they put x because reasons, right? So if they do that, then you have the option to limit what they can and cannot do. Now, if you want to go one step further, what I typically would do is you can make it a mandatory, right? Because right now they're optional. If I leave it like that and I run it, they're optional. I can leave it blank and it will accept it. But I also have the option to say dash in1 is equal to whatever, dash in2 equal to whatever, and it works. Similarly, I could do in2 first and in1 second, still works just fine. You can see the variables are swapped. The system, because I said what they are, does it. It doesn't know what they are. So if I go to run this and I go dash, it doesn't know what to ask me for because it's not going to pre-read and pre-compile the code. It wouldn't make sense. So you need to know what those are if you're going to do it this way. As long as you know and you're doing it the right way, then you're in good shape, right? The next thing is if you want to make them mandatory. So if I come here, I have the option now to go square bracket parameter and then in brackets mandatory equals to $true, which is our Boolean, if you'll remember, like that. So the first one and the second one, they're both mandatory. So if I save that and I run the script without anything, it's gonna like, oh, hold on, I made a typo. Yeah, I did. I was obviously doing it on purpose to show you what it does. And now that I run it, it says like, hold on, you did not give me the parameters I want. N1, okay, whatever. N2, whatever, and there they are, right? So the system is allowing you to do these different things. Now, as you can tell, it didn't know if it was a string or number, so it made them a string, so it concatenated it instead of doing them as integer. So if I want to do that, I can still do like earlier, int. to say it's integer. I could do double, I could do long, I could do float, whatever, right? Because it's just something to keep in mind. And by doing that now, it's adding them up the right way because I said it's integer. Now, if I run this again and I put something that it doesn't want, it's like, no, you're not doing the right thing, buddy. I'm like, fine, I'll give you a number. But this time, I don't care. Nope, you can't do that. Okay, fine, here's a number. Then it's happy. So the system, because I put the variables, is smart enough to ask for the right thing. Now, obviously, you would not call it input 1. You would say first number to be added, right? And then second number to be added. So when you do that and you run it, you know, the user sees what you're looking for. So that makes it a tiny bit easier. But once again, it's up to you, right? And that is what that's going to give you. So now that I didn't rechange those, it doesn't like it. But again, it's just to show you. Cool. All right. So this is going to be the inputs for policies or for scripts. This is something, once again, you need to at least be somewhat familiar, because a lot of scripts you're going to do for your end users are going to require some kind of input, username, password, values that you don't want to keep in the script. You want them to be able to put it in when they run it. So that gives you that availability right here. Right? So that is super important. All right. The next thing I want to touch on, though, is PowerShell modules. It's not in your lab manual. There's no lab for it. There's a demo, I think, but there's no lab. It is super important because as you're going to want to use more complex things, you're going to want to say, oh, I want to automate Azure. I want to automate my VMware stuff, whatever. You're going to need to import these modules to be able to use them. PowerShellGallery.com is where you find all the different modules you're looking for. And as you do, you'll be able to just leverage a function that exists. So a module is a set of code that is pre-made by someone else, and they're sharing it with the community, either altruistically or very selfishly, like some of those companies do, because they want you to use their stuff, right? Duh. How do you use modules? It's pretty easy. You say import a module, then you use a command. Super nice, very easy. Love using it. One thing that you'll get a lot is that if you run a command and the command is not there because you did not import the module, you will get that command let not found error. I get this all the time. So that is something that you need to make sure that you have the proper snap-ins and module that you chose. Now, another thing is that don't forget, even if you put the module in your machine, you make a great script, you save the script, you share the script, you run it through your platforms, it does not mean the end device also has the module. So if you're going to give it to a server to run against a VMware device, you need that server to have PowerCLI. If it doesn't, it's not going to work. PowerCLI, by the way, is the PowerShell module for VMware that VMware made. But don't assume that the machine will have it. That machine needs to have it. So you should, in your code, include something. Get the list of module. If it's not in there, then install the module as part of your script to avoid any issues. So why would you want to use modules, really? Honestly, it's super easy. The commands are made for you. The functions are pre-made. Everything's there. There's no dev work required. You just need to use them. So you can reduce your dev cycle dramatically by using pre-made commands. There's also a lot of modules that exist that will allow you to connect to third parties like Cisco, Meraki, Azure, things like that. So it's just a matter of getting familiar with it and building upon what you need. So once again, that's really all I would recommend on that. Now, if you want to use the modules, those are the 3 commands you'll likely be using on any given day. Get module will get you the modules that are available to be installed based on your repository. Get installed module will get you whatever is installed on your machine. Duh. And then finally, install module dash the name will install the module you chose. So install module dash name and then whatever you're looking for. And with that, I'm getting towards the end. I do want to quickly touch on an automation manager in PowerShell, just because a few of you at the beginning said you want to do that. So I'm going to quickly touch on that. There isn't too much. It's honestly very simple. I know I keep using the word easy and simple, but it really is once you get familiar with it. The first thing is that I'm going to say this is not an automation manager course. Do not expect that to take this and just be able to use. If you want to learn automation manager, there is an automation bootcamp. It's going to be in Q4. I'm doing this course again, which is a super fun course. I've done this course, I don't even know how many times anymore. It's a really good one that I like to do. But either way, if you're interested, you can join that one. The link is in the chat. So with that, When you're in Automation Manager, you make a new policy, you look for the little building block categories objects called PowerShell script. You drag and drop. Now, the first thing that I always tell people to do is go to script, edit, take your script. So let's say I'm going to take this guy, copy paste here. Make sure, first of all, make sure it runs. If it doesn't work here, it's not going to work here. It's that simple. But if it does work here, copy paste it, do OK. Don't change anything, run it. Make sure it runs. In this case, it said 852, Thursday at 10:04, it's 5 hours. So that seems like it's working, right? The process ID is getting out, we're getting the date, we're getting the difference and everything. So we're in good shape. The script is doing what I want it to do. The reason why this is critical is that there are some rare occasions where a syntax might be not allowed in Automation Manager because it impacts some of those encapsulation that we have to do to run code from within code. So if you have any issues there, that would be why. So please make sure that you test it like that without changing anything. Once you're comfortable that it does work here. Now, let's say I want to take that spooler service and make that an input. The first step towards doing that is you go to policy input, make an input, add, then in service, service name. Service name will be spooler, right? Easy. And then do OK. Now I go to my run script, I do an input there. So I'm going to go in SSVC. And yes, I'm putting S twice. It's because I want the name to be different than this one. It's just easier that way because I know which one is which. So in script service. And I link that to my input. So basically the input will be passed here to the script. The next step is if I go to script right here and I do edit again, you see now that variable is given to me. So you can do one of two things. You could replace spooler and just be done with it. My personal preference is to duplicate the line and copy and comment out the original. That way you don't modify the original. If you have to test, this makes things so much easier. And then you replace. So you know this one is commented out because I did it here. But this one will now take the input and force it here. So if I do OK here and I run this and I say spooler, this should still work, and it does. 852, blah, blah, blah. And if I come here now and I do W32 time, as my example from earlier, you can tell when 32 time is process ID 32,000 for some reason. It was started Thursday at 1:41 because, as we all remember, we restarted earlier. And it's been up for an hour and a half, which makes sense. So now, dynamically, when I run this automation policy, I am able to pass that parameter in. The exact same thing applies to output parameters. If I want to do a monitoring and central, or if I want to output that to something else, you would do the exact same thing. You create your output, you create the output, you link them, you go in your script, you copy paste the variable, and you link them. This is all you need to do. So the exact same process either way. It's just a matter of mapping it, and I always recommend commenting out the original line. And the reason for that is, let's say I want to do a change here and I'm not sure. Copy paste, go into PowerShell, and then we're just gonna move that like that. And then all I have to do is go back to a script, paste it, uncomment, comment, and I'm good to test in a matter of 2 seconds. Instead of spending, 30 seconds rewriting the line, risking a typo and all these weird things, I can then do my change, test, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm done. Change that back, copy paste that back, come back here, edit, copy paste, and boom, I'm good to use it again. So now you're making your life a whole lot easier, right? And that is just allowing you to use what you have in your tools without having to reinvent the wheel. So if you find a script online, test it in VS Code. If it works, copy paste it into Automation Manager. If it works, add your input output, test it. If it still works, upload and use it, and boom, you're golden, right? Super easy, super convenient. It's just something that's going to make your life a whole lot easier as you start to use this more and more. Let's talk a little bit about the resources that are available. There's a ton of available online. There's a lot of great training. If you guys are subscribed with lynda.com, the online training with LinkedIn, if you're subscribed to a variety of different CBT Nugget sites, those have amazing training courses on PowerShell. I made my own myself just because I wanted it to be more geared towards a specific type of thing. That's just my preference. But there's a lot of different great courses out there. Now, if you want to just move on and learn more, the first thing I say to get resources, use IntelliSense. When you're into VS Code, and you start typing a command. So get dash service space dash. It gives you all the different things you can do. There's a lot of stuff like name, computer name, blah, blah, blah. So it gives you a lot of stuff. Use that. regexpal, if you're going to use regular expression and you're not super familiar with it, regexpal, regexr, there's a lot of different sites that will let you play with regex and make your own regex code. So use those. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just go to those sites and learn, and it's super fun. That's how I learned regex, to be honest. I'm still a bare early intermediate at best, but I can manage my way through most anything by using these sites. You then add the PowerShell documentation. Microsoft has a fantastic documentation for PowerShell and all the functions, how they work and everything. PowerShell Gallery is where they keep all the different plugins or modules, so you can go there and grab those, take a look. PowerShell.org and /free resources is a great site where you can get a ton of training resources, so definitely recommend you look at that. The Microsoft Learning site is also a great resource. And finally, the Automation Cookbook, right? It's always a great place to go. So someone is saying, I'm trying to run a script when uptime becomes fail. Is there a way to send it with scripting? I'm not sure I understand what you mean. If you when uptime becomes failed, I'm assuming you mean in RMM or in Central. What you need to do is in RMM you do a task and you assign it to when a check fails, and in Central you add the monitoring service and you go to the self-healing tab and you assign the script. You can do automation policy script or service restarts. So Christoph, you can do either. So depending on which platform you use, it's just a matter of doing that. That would be a really good thing that we could review on the office hours. So if you're not registered for that, that would be a really good thing to do. The office hours is where I go through more or less anything how-to related. So if you have any how-to questions, anything specific outside of those webinars, that is a very, very good topic to go in on. So yeah, if you're in Central, Christoph, you would basically go into the service, go into the self-healing tab, and just turn it on and set it up there. Super easy. All right, so Jacob is asking, how do the variables work when you join their parameters with a dot? So, okay, where do you see the dot? So here, I'm not sure where you see the dot. I have a comma here because I have more than one, but I don't have a dot. I'm not sure I understand the question, Jacob, if you want to clarify that for me. Okay, I understand. So what you're referring to is like here, the dot start time or dot total hours, things like that. This is because some variables, when they're created, when they exist, they will have multiple data points. So for example, if I say service list equal to get dash service, the system is gonna, or dash name equal to spooler. I don't care. There you go. So this, okay, this service list dot here, the system in that service variable, I guess it's an array, it has multiple data points. The system is aware of that. It has a name, it has a status, and so on. And those are there as part of that variable. They exist in the scope of that variable. So the function, when it outputs something, it outputs that. When I did a date difference, because a date variable is built with that, when I do the date, I can say total hours, days, total days, and so on. The system just automatically generates that for me as part of that creation. It's just part of what those variables are. And that's really what it is. Okay, now I understand. The only way I would recommend is to go into the PowerShell, the Microsoft site. If you look at the different functions, they show you what they output, and then it'll make a little more sense. But it's a native thing in PowerShell. The system will output multiple items for a variable. It's just how it works. All right, and I think that's all the questions I have for right now. So guys, thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next course. Thanks, everyone.